So we can start again. PowerPoint is not producing more problems. So we had looked at the RSA crypto system, and the next thing I want to show you is the way we use these methods to get digital signatures. Like I said, we need cryptography to be able to do something like certainly have confidentiality, but also to write something like the digital signature. Now, what is a digital signature about? What are signatures about? Or what is the scenario? You have certain important information which two persons communicate. So Alice sends Bob a check. In cryptography, we always have Alice and Bob, because it's nicer to talk about Alice and Bob than talk about persons A and B. So assume you get a check over 5,000 euros. You just insert another zero, go to the bank. The bank now, how can it check whether that is a valid content? In particular, if it is an electronic document, how can you notice that something has been changed? And this is the question that we have. How can we make sure that we can detect changes to a document? Now, we know that from real life, like this is an old document which we use for making money transfers. And such a document is just a piece of text without any value. So without a signature, a document is not carrying any value. It's useless. If you write a signature on it, then what are you doing? You are signing a certain, like if I would sign that. At that moment, when I sign that, I have, or I state that I have looked at that document, everything on that document is correct, and I certify that this is a valid document, and I write my signature. So I assert the validity of the document, and my signature links my identity with that document. That's the reason why I have a signature, a unique signature. And now if I would change something, I would change something here, would write another zero there, then that would be a change which is visible, and I would have to sign that again in order to make that correction also valid. That's how we deal with documents and signatures on piece of paper. Now we want to have the same functionality on a digital document. You have to make sure that both aspects are integrated into a signature. You have to assert the validity of the document, and we have to link ourselves with that document, or this signer has to be linked to that document. Obviously, any visible modification invalidates the document unless the modification carries a signature. And so the digital signature must have exactly the same functionality. And there's one common method for getting that. So you compute a hash value of a document. So you have a document. From that is some file. You compute a smaller piece of information, which is a hash value, a message digest. And so the document can be arbitrarily large. You compute that short message digest. It is a so-called one-way hash function. A one-way hash function is easily computed, but it's hard to invert. Like it's very hard to determine the document which actually was the argument for that hash function. In particular, you must make sure that if I have a slightly different document, D prime, and I compute a hash, it should never go to the same hash value. So if I have neighboring documents which are close to each other, they should not lead to the same hash value. if you make a small change to the document, you should get a completely different hash value. This is an important, there are several requirements for one-way hash functions. And so in particular, it must be very difficult to find out a conflict. That means how to modify a document such that you get another document which has the same hash value. So you can make sure that if I sign a or if I compute the hash value, then this is unique for this document, and some documents or the documents in the neighborhood of that document, if neighborhood is defined as there are only a few changes to the content. And then you sign this digest. So my document actually is not D, but it is M, and M prime. This is D. This is my digest, the message digest. And then I sign that document, or that digest, by encrypting it with my secret key. So I use my secret key, and then I get a signature sigma. And this is now a piece of information which carries information on the document, this digest of that document M, and hopefully not of another document in the vicinity of that. And then I use my identity, my secret key, to get the signature sigma. And now if you want to check whether the document, like somebody receives, this is sent somewhere, you have the document here which you received, and then you just compute with the hash function, you compute a digest, and you take the signature here, you use the public key of that person to get the digest that you had computed over there, and if they are the same, then the document is still correct. Yeah, so you have to know the hash function to compute the hash value of that document. You can decrypt the signature, and then you have information that with a very high probability this document has not been modified. It is obvious if the documents are arbitrarily large and the digest has 256 bits, for example, then there are many documents which have the same hash value. But the requirement is that documents in some environment of that original document where you just make a few changes, like all those documents have different values, different hash values. So you can sign and you assert the validity of the document and link yourself to the document, and you can check whether the document that you received is the same as the one that has been signed. And so this is exactly what we have in a real, like on paper. We have the document, we can see whether something has been changed, which is visible, and if something is changed, we would say, no, I don't accept that. If nothing has been changed, we assume that this is still the original document. So one-way hash function, here it's stated again. It's mapping a set of items to a set of addresses. Like this is in memory management of computers. You use hash functions to store many data records in a limited space. And the requirements are that arbitrary sets of items should be spread uniformly over the set of addresses. So all the hash values should be actually utilized. And neighboring items should not be mapped to neighboring addresses. As I said, like if I have here many neighboring items, and this is my list of addresses, then they should be all moved to different places, and it may be that you have other documents which are far away, which get mapped to the same address, but this must be a completely different document. It must be very difficult to determine which actually are the documents leading to the same hash value. So this is an important requirement. It should be impossible to compute an item from its hash value or to compute another document having the same hash value. And certainly weaker requirement would be that to compute the inverse hash function, it should be more expensive than the value of this information, the typical requirement. There are certain standard hash functions which are available. SHA stands for Secure Hash Algorithm, or MD5 Message Digest number 5. Currently, we have something like SHA. Many people use SHA 256, and there are many variants of the SHA algorithm. You can just look them up. I don't give you more details on that. So these are standard functions that you can download, are available, and they are quite secure, I would say. Now another question is, how do I know that the public key that I get is actually the public key of the person that claims to be the owner? Because it may be that Alice and Bob are communicating. Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and now there is some enemy in between, and this enemy in between also has a public key and a secret key. They have a public key, secret key, public key, secret key. And now Alice wants to send a message to Bob and needs the public key, but the enemy interferes and sends his public key to Alice. And now Alice thinks that this is the public key of Bob and would encrypt a message with that public key and send the message. The enemy would get the encrypted message, use his secret key. He has the public key from Bob and can encrypt the message or a different message with the public key of Bob, send the message here then to Bob, and Bob can decrypt that using his secret key, and he would think that this is a message from Alice, but it is a message from the enemy, and this is a so-called man in the middle approach or middle attack. Somebody else claims to have the public key of somebody else, and in that way can interfere with the communication. So you must have ways to really know that a public key that you want to use is the public key of the person that you assume that it is. So the recipient of a digital signature must know the valid public key of the sender in order to perform that signature check. And now the question is how you can get that information. For that, the validity must be asserted and checked using a certificate. Now a certificate, so you have your public key. This is your public key here, some document. Now I say you need some kind of certificate on that, some piece of information that states this is a valid public key. Such a certificate must be signed. In order to verify that this signature is valid, you need the public key of the person or institution which established or which made that certificate. And so that this also needs a certificate. So you have an endless chain of certificate requirements. So what you need is, at some point, you need to trust that I know a public key of some person. This is what is done in PGP. You have a trustworthy person, and you can trust one signature. Whatever is signed by that person, you can check and you can trust it. And then if this person that you trusted sends you the public key of somebody else and signs it, you know, okay, now I have another trusted public key. And in this way you get public keys which are certified by many different people, so you get all kinds of trust relationships between persons who trust each other that they have a valid public key. This is in PGP, the so-called web of trust. In the legally binding world, we need some kind of state authority. We need a certification authority. This is our root of trust, and this is based on signature legislation. We need some kind of law or regulation, public regulation, how we get certificates. And for that we have the German signature law, and you can look it up if you like to. It is a legislation where all kinds of things are stated about how to design or how to write or how to generate public key pairs and things like that, and what the requirements are for digital signatures, and there are different levels of digital signatures, and you can look it up. It's interesting to look at that. The problem is that we in Germany are always very strict, so we have actually 3 levels of signatures. We have a simple signature, which is not really very safe. We have a qualified, I think that's the best one, and there's something in between. We have 3 levels, A, B, C, of signatures, and for the most secure one, the requirements are so strict that it's quite expensive to actually use it, because you need special software, you need special hardware devices to perform a digital signature. So we are more or less in the middle area here with signatures in the moment. But it is very strict requirement, and so it is not in that much widespread use. That's a little bit of a problem. Nevertheless, we have that legislation. And it is an official legislation on the use of strong cryptography. And a few years before that, about 5 years before that, the governments were arguing that it should be illegal to use strong cryptography. And it was quite a bit of work necessary to persuade the politicians that this is something which is actually needed. We certainly needed to make sure that we can communicate in a secure way, that we can sign contracts in a legally binding way in a digital form, and so on. Now, the certificate, I said we need certificates on public keys. Such a certificate has certain content, certain structure. The standard certificates that we have are so-called X509 certificates. And they have all kinds of administrative information, version information, serial number, an ID of the algorithm, who has issued this certificate, the validity period, not before a certain date, not after a certain date. If you have a certificate which is only valid for a short period of time, you have to renew it again and again. Here from KIT we get certificates now which are valid for, I think, 5 years or so. You have to make sure who owns that, what the public key information actually is, which algorithm is used, or for which algorithm is this public key determined, and what is actually the public key. And then you can have identifiers of the issuer, of the subject. You can have all kinds of extensions. You have to know how the signature algorithm for that certificate, which one is used there, and you need a signature on that certificate. So this is what a certificate is about. And you know that quite often when we access a website, you get an error message. This certificate does not seem to be valid. or comes from a different institution or something like that, do you want to proceed anyway? And the normal response to that would be, yes, I would like to proceed anyway. But we certainly should check whether the certificate looks correct or not, and what the problem is. If it's just the validity period that is a problem, then you could say, okay, it will be valid after that. But to deal with such a public key infrastructure is not that simple, really. So if we have these certificates, we need some kind of certification hierarchy. As I said, you need a certificate that has to be signed. To check the signature, you need a certificate, and so on. So we need a root of trust, which in Germany is the Bundesamt für Sicherheit in der Informationstechnik. They issue the root certificates. And so if you install a certificate in your computer, you have to install a certification or a certificate path from the certification authority that issued your certificate up to the root certification authority. Usually it's a chain of certification authorities. And the public key of the root certification authority certainly has to be accessible to everybody in a trustworthy form. And now certainly it may be that you have other, like here as a neighboring, you could have the NSA or some other country having also roots of trust. Then they must be able to exchange information on their certificates. So the root CA approves and certifies subordinate certification authorities, and then they can issue again certification or certificates. So Alice and Bob get their certificates from some certification authority, and then they can exchange their certificates, and you can check whether they are valid. So you can extract from the certificate, you extract the public key. You can check the validity of the public key using the digital signature of this certification authority, and you check the validity of the certification authority's public key using the roots CA signature, and then you are done. And the validity of that has to be established in some other trusted way. Okay. So that's about certificates. And then there can be forests of certification trees, and there is the web of trust, where we have just a different starting point, not such a legal certification authority, but just some person whom we trust, and from that we can build up a web of trust. The advantages of that web of trust are that it is completely self-organizing. We don't need any state-controlled certification authority. But if you want to do something which is legally binding, you have to use these kinds of certification authorities. Okay, that's about digital signatures, and in that way we can also introduce possibilities to check the integrity of information. And you know that in our smart meter infrastructure, to go back to that, all the information which is sent there, all the messages, have to be digitally signed in order to be able to check the integrity of the information that is sent from the smart meter gateway to the metering system operator or to the utility or wherever should receive the data. So you need these kinds of techniques in smart meter infrastructure, which is supposed to protect private data. Now, I said we can actually build up a secure communication protocol built on those ingredients. So we have Alice and Bob as our communication partners who want to exchange information. Alice wants to send a letter to Bob. So what she will do is she will generate a digest from that using the hash function. She will use her secret key, SA, to generate the digital signature. She will generate a random session key to use some symmetric encryption method, which she agreed to use with Bob. Then you have the encrypted message, and then you take Bob's certificate, extract the public key from Bob's certificate, use Bob's public key to encrypt the public, or to encrypt the session key, and then those three documents, the encrypted session key, the encrypted document, and the digital signature of the document are all three sent to Bob. And Bob can now use Alice's certificate, which has to be sent together with that signature, can take the public key from the certificate, use the public key to get the digest that was generated by Alice, can decrypt the session key using his own secret key. Here, that's his secret key. He can use the session key to decrypt the message, gets the letter to Bob back, and now can check whether that is the original message by generating a digest of that message, and then check whether the computed digest and the received digest actually are the same. So this is a communication protocol which is standard. Meanwhile, for some technical reason, sometimes you have different public key pairs for signatures and for encryption of session keys, but this is more technical detail. Essentially, this is the standard way of communicating in a fairly secure way. So this allows to have authentication. You can check whether Alice, like Bob can check whether Alice has sent this message, because he can use her digital signature, he can use her public key and finds out or gets the correct digest. You can check the integrity. That is what we have seen there. You compute the digest from the received document and check whether it is the same as the one that was sent. Confidentiality you get by using the session key and the symmetric algorithm, or symmetric cryptographic algorithm. And the non-repudiability, Alice cannot deny the use of her secret key. You never know whether actually Alice has used that, but at least she cannot deny the use of her secret key. Yeah, it may be somebody else used that, but her secret key has been used. Okay, so this is a secure communication protocol. And then there are some standardized protocols which are implemented in our communication infrastructure. There is the secure socket layer, SSL, or now it is more or less called transport layer security. So this is what is behind HTTPS. As soon as you have HTTPS connections, you have transport layer security. That means if you have two applications, let me call them A and B again, and you have here the different ports at the sender and recipient, you communicate over a certain port, then the information that is sent from the application A to application B, this part here below those ports is made secure. That's transport layer security. What's happening up here is not made secure. So on the application layer, nothing is encrypted, but below from the TCP layer and on the transport layer, you have encryption. And the algorithm for encryption has to be negotiated between sender and recipient, and this is done by the machines on which, or the computers on which you are operating. So you have secure communication over insecure channels by authentication between client and server. You have digital signatures in there, and the encryption of transmitted data using session keys. So this is quite a secure way of communicating in the internet using transport layer security. And it uses combinations of asymmetric and symmetric methods, as I have just shown you. So the client and server negotiate to use the strongest cryptographic method which is available to both, because you can have arbitrary devices which are communicating. It is used by HTTPS, what I said, but it does not provide additional security on the application layer up there. But the communication line is made secure. So this is more or less what I wanted to tell you about smart meters and security. To talk about smart meters needs to talk also about security, because the requirements are that we use digital signatures there, that the communication is made secure. So you need algorithms exactly like that. So what you need is confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility to authenticated users, abbreviated as CIA. This is the standard abbreviation for security aspects. Here, privacy protection is one of the essential aspects with respect to smart meters. You have to make sure that nobody who is unauthorized gets access to that private data, but the data has to be moved somewhere, has to be sent to the metering system operator, or to the utility, or to the whoever needs that information. So the data has to be provided, but not more and not for other purposes. And you can make it simple and just send everything everywhere, but this is not what is reasonable. What you should do is send only the data that is needed to the agent or to the location where some functionality is performed, but you should never send more than that. And as I gave you this example with the smart ER protocol, where you just send slightly different data, but still make sure that the recipient gets the information that is essential, namely the aggregated value from several senders actually is correct. So if we talk about security and safety issues, certainly this goes far beyond the simple smart metering scenario, but it needs the ingredients that I just briefly introduced to you. Okay, so that's about security. And now we come to the final chapter, which is supposed to be electric mobility and battery charging. So this will be the final, not exactly the final chapter. The final chapter will be a summary. And in this chapter, I will just tell you a story about like how to exploit the potential of smart grids and e-mobility, how we can actually provide the necessary energy for driving and do it such that privacy is protected and well, mobility is guaranteed and so on, and the requirements of the grid can be respected. Actually, the slides here have been done some time ago by my former PhD student, Mark Multin. He actually designed or implemented the protocols for intelligent charging, recharging of batteries in electric vehicles. So we should integrate definitely by using information communication technologies. And I would like to show you a scenario which is the following. You want to make a trip with an electric vehicle from Karlsruhe to Leipzig, and you have an overnight stay at Nuremberg, and the car you have has a driving range of 150 kilometers. Now, there you have the problem of electric mobility, like unless you're driving a Tesla, where you have 400 kilometers range, but the standard electric vehicles have something in the range of 150 kilometers driving range. And the consumer has a contract with EnBW on getting electricity from the charging stations that are operated by EnBW. Now he wants to go to Leipzig. In Leipzig, EnBW has no charging stations. Somebody else has a charging station there. And the distance is too large, 260 kilometers. So what you need is intermediate charging stations. So maybe the first charging station is an EnBW charging station at some Autobahn rest stop. Then you can recharge the battery, takes less than 30 minutes. You have fast charging at something like 22 kilowatt or maybe even more. And you recharge your battery, and then you get to Nuremberg. You stay there overnight. You can have AC, like alternating current charging at a private wall box. It takes a few hours at your friend's home. And then you drive on, and there's another charging station at an Autobahn rest stop operated by RWE, by RWE, a different provider. And you get to Leipzig, stay there again at a hotel parking lot, and you have again AC charging. Now this has to be possible. You need to communicate, and for that you need protocols. And we'll tell you a little bit about the protocols that we need to make that possible. So how to get the energy from the grid into the cars in a reasonable way. And so let's have a closer look at that. So you certainly should be able to get information on where actually are the charging stations. So you should also be able to reserve a charging spot ahead of time, because you want to, or you know it takes about 30 minutes or 20 to 30 minutes to get at least 80% of the driving range back. And so you need a service to reserve a charging spot. And so the question is how you can do that in a very simple way. And for that we have protocols. So we have the ISO, IEC, so these are standardization authorities. We have the standard 15118, the road vehicles, vehicle to grid communication interface. That's for communicating between a car and a charging station. They have to communicate in some way. For that you need a protocol. That's the 15118. And so we have the electric vehicle, and we have the electric vehicle supply equipment, which is the charging station, and behind that there is some back office, some system behind that having information on tariffs, situation of the energy system, and so on. And then you have the open charge point protocol, and that is for communicating between the electric vehicle supply equipment and, well, let's say some house or some building, the charging point management system. For example, if you have a parking garage owner, he has a few hundred parking lots there and 30, 40 charging stations. He's operating all the charging stations and has to manage the charging processes. So you have some charging point management system. That's for communicating between that management system and the charging station. The 15118 was just for communicating between vehicle and charging station. And then you have a third protocol, which is the open intercharge protocol. And here you have to communicate between many different business parties, for example, to get roaming. We know roaming from mobile communication. you have a contract with one mobility provider or with one communication provider, and then you can use any other system, communication system, and you have to pay some kind of roaming fee, or at least you can use it because you have a contract with one of those providers. Something similar has been thought about for electric vehicles or for the charging stations. If you have the EnBW owner of charging stations, people have contracts with EnBW, others with RWE, but you should be able to get power from RWE even if you are an EnBW customer, and you only want to get a bill from EnBW and not from RWE. So this is roaming. And for that, you need, again, some communication protocol. So this is the intercharge protocol. This 15.11.8 was released in spring 2014. That was at the end of our ITSOIS project, and we actually were part of the standardization committee and designed one of the first prototypes of that, like implemented the first prototype there. It is a plug and charge mechanism, and what you have to do there is you have to authenticate. Or you have to find out who is actually the person who wants to get electricity, or which kind of car is it, who is having the contract. This you have to find out. Is actually the person authorized to get access to that charging station? In some way you have to talk about billing, you have to talk about costs, and you have to schedule and control the charging process. That is some kind of demand-side management. Like you don't want, like if you have a large parking lot, many cars are sitting there, you don't want that all cars are recharging their batteries at the same time. If you know that they have a certain time period for being or getting the energy back into their batteries, it doesn't make really a difference at what time they get the energy back. They only want to make sure that when they want to leave again the parking garage, then they should have the appropriate amount of energy in their batteries. So it enables to realize demand-side management by using information of the following type. You have a certain time of use tariff. That means time-varying prices for electricity. And you can communicate that tariff to the vehicle. You might have a forecast of availability of renewable energy systems. So you know at which time is it more favorable to charge than in other times. You have to know the needed energy amount of electric vehicle. If it attaches its cable to your charging station, how much energy actually would it like to get? And what is the desired departure time? If you know the desired departure time and the needed energy amount, then you know everything you need to be able to schedule the charging process. You can exploit the flexibility of the charging demand. This is exactly what is important to do that in a reasonable way. I will show you in a moment what kind of information is necessary for that. And then we have this open charge point protocol, and it allows the electric vehicle supply equipment, so the charging stations, to communicate with central management systems from different vendors. Again, you need authorization, synchronization, meter values. Here you get actually the possibility to reserve a charging station. If you want to go somewhere, you want to reserve that at a certain time you will be there to get access to that charging station. And certainly charging stations have to be updated, diagnostics have to be made, so this is administrative background for the 15.11.8 protocol. And remote power systems management actions are also there, so information related to these things are exchanged there. And this is, like there are two versions, 1.5, 2.0. Meanwhile, 2.0 is on the market. There you get also charge control information from the electric vehicle. If you don't know how much information the electric vehicle needs, or how much energy the electric vehicle needs, you cannot really perform a reasonable demand-side management. You have to know exactly how much energy is needed. And you also need information from the distribution system operator. There may be some limits on the power at which you can recharge the battery. There are the tariffs, and so this information has to be communicated to the charging station and to the vehicle, and then they want to come up with a charging process for that vehicle. And on top of that, we have the open intercharge protocol, and one of those, like a specific instance of that, is the so-called Hubject protocol. This is an initiative of some institutions in Germany who provide that Hubject protocol to make sure that you can get energy from different charging stations operated by totally different e-mobility providers, and the roaming contract is handled in this Hubject protocol. And so for that, the authorization or the authentication information is used that you provided here at the charging station. The charge point management system then is using that information to make sure that actually your customer contract that you have, for example, with ENBV or with ENBW, is used for paying for the energy that you get. So you have a customer management system here behind that, so many different systems have to communicate here. That's this third layer. And then we get back to our trip that we want to make. So you can search OICP compatible charging stations along your route and reserve charging stations. And so you estimate the arrival times. You have your navigation system, tells you when you will be there, and so you reserve the charging stations. And so this is done using the Hubject platform. On these, like maybe that on your smartphone you also have some other services available, like energy efficient routing services, things like that are developed or have been developed already. And then certainly things might happen that you have a traffic jam on the Autobahn and you have to change the reservation. Also this has to be possible, that while you are driving you must be able to modify your reservations. And when you arrive, you have authentication and authorization, for example, by using your smartphone. Maybe you have an extra identity card. Maybe you do that with this smartphone service. And then you get to the you get to Nuremberg, to your friend's house, and there you have some time of use tariff. That's the energy providers, or that's the house owner's contract with the energy provider. You have a certain load limits, local load limits. You don't know what happens in the vicinity. Maybe there are many vehicle owners there. They want to have their vehicles recharged, and so the distribution system operator will enforce certain load limits, and then your recharging process can be scheduled at any time between 8 p.m. and 9 a.m. You just tell the system you want to depart again at 9 a.m. and then the charging process can be done by communicating between the charging station and the vehicle. Okay. Now, how is that done? What kind of information do we actually need to perform that charging schedule, or to perform that charging process? So you have a certain time at which you plug in your cable into the charging station. You specify a departure time, and then you communicate certain values. The vehicle is communicating its requirement for the minimum power that it needs while it is charging the battery. You need some minimum power level because some other systems have also be operating or need power to operate, so you have a minimum power level that you need. And you have a maximum power level that you can actually deal with. And if you are able to actually to discharge, to feedback power into the grid, also for that you need a minimum power and a maximum power. Equivalent to that, the supply equipment will specify its values for that. What is the minimum power that it can provide? And what is the maximum power of the electric vehicle supply equipment? The same for power feedback. What is the maximum power that you can feedback into the system? And this, certainly you have to take the minimum of those values in order to get to come up with your recharging process. And now you have the information from the distribution system operator about certain load limits. So maybe that there are certain times where you have lower power limits than at other times. Maybe there are many other vehicles which want to get recharged and there's just not more power available at that time. And then you have this gray area, which is the charging flexibility within the DSM restrictions. So this is now taking all the restrictions. These are the restrictions from the vehicles and from the supply equipment. These are the restrictions from the demand side, from the distribution system operator. And now you have to see how you can put in a schedule for the recharging. Now this can look like follows. The initial part here, I think it's, the immediate charging has to be done because the vehicle owner will specify in a minimum state of charge that has to be guaranteed in case the owner wants to make a spontaneous trip. Then you need a minimum level, a minimum range that should be satisfied, and for this you have to recharge the battery immediately. Then you just stop and wait and start again a bit later. So you continue charging. Maybe there's a low price according to the time of use tariff. And then you have problems with the maximum load that is possible. And during that time, it might even be beneficial for the environment that you feed back some power into the system, because there actually seems to be a need for power. So here you have recharge the battery at a low price. Maybe here's a high price, and you just feed back the power again into the system to relieve the environment from those problems. And then later on, maybe high feed-in tariff interval, and then from that you get some proposed schedule. Now so this in green would be the proposed schedule by the electric vehicle supply equipment. Now the vehicle manufacturers, the car manufacturers, insist that the ultimate decision on the charging process has to be made in the vehicle and not by the environment. And so it may be that the real charging schedule by the electric vehicle is different from the proposed schedule, but it has to comply with the constraints that have been there. And so the battery management system of the vehicle, so battery management system, BMS here, is part of the electric vehicle, may intervene, uses a lower power level, maybe because the battery gets too hot, and or for some other reason. So the battery management system of the vehicle, for safety reasons, must have the ultimate decision on when to charge and when not to charge. Okay, just one more remark onto that. I said that the vehicle has the ultimate decision, but we have seen there is a protocol communication between the supply equipment and the electric vehicle to come up with some proposed schedule. At any point in time during that charging process, the supply equipment may interrupt the actual charging process if something has changed, for example, some spontaneous event, and you have to modify, maybe you have other constraints with respect to the maximum power, and then you can negotiate a new charging schedule or charging process. And so, in principle, the electric vehicle supply equipment or the institutions behind that can actually influence the way the charging is done. It's not completely under the control of the electric vehicle, but the electric vehicle has to comply with the requirements of the supply equipment, and it can only modify it within the degrees of freedom that are left, looking at those constraints from the environment. So you see, such a protocol is quite complex, but it's working, and it's actually implemented in quite a few charging stations meanwhile. Now we get back to our trip. So here, like the business meeting at the location there at Leipzig, you have the owner has put his car on the parking lot of that hotel, and it is connected to the charging station there. And now there are quite a few vehicles there. So let me just go back here again. So the business meeting takes longer, and that means the departure time has to be shifted by some time. So it looks now like the following. Here we have the hotel parking lot. We have, in this example, 4 vehicles. And this is the vehicle that we just talked about. The departure time has been shifted. And so there is an interruption there. And another vehicle can step in and can get recharged a little bit earlier. So if you are managing number of charging stations, you certainly have to make sure that the load limits for that location are satisfied, that you don't go over those load limits for the combined charging processes. And it's obvious that it is an interesting task to actually or schedule the charging processes of many vehicles in a larger parking lot, at hotels, at parking garages, on some company parking lot, or wherever that is. And you have quite some flexibility potential to schedule all the charging processes based on this protocol 15.11.8. And here you have certainly a much more interesting or more demanding scheduling environment than we saw at just a single charging station at a wall box of a private house. So this was the charging point management system here, registers the new departure time, delays the charging of electric vehicle 4, as I said, and electric vehicle 1 actually needs to depart earlier and can do that. And You see here there's a interruption of the charging because that has to be finished. This has restarted, so this one stopped for a while to make sure that there's not a violation of the limits that we have for the sum of all the charging powers. Okay, so this is actually the scenario for integrating electric vehicles into the energy system, providing the energy, distributing the energy to the vehicles. You need many different protocols, 15.11.8, OCPP, OICP, for dealing with the different problems between charging station and vehicle, between charging station and environment, and then between different providers of energy in the subject or the OICP protocol. Now this is here again our Energy Smart Home Lab at KIT, which we will visit in 3 weeks. What you have to do is you have to... Do you have a question? We have to utilize all the different flexibility potentials in the best way to, for example, maximize the consumption of renewable energy, minimize carbon dioxide footprint, or minimize greenhouse gas emissions. So we know that the electric vehicles provide quite a bit of flexibility potential, and in order to exploit that in the best possible way, we need appropriate management systems. So the research questions that we have here are, like we have this smart home scenario, which we look at here at KIT, for example. Then it may be that you have a pool of different electric vehicles that you use for business trips. This is a scenario that is looked at SAP, for example. There is a project, there are projects running, and if you have cars or vehicles for business trips, it's a different way of planning the trips as if you have just a private car, or you have the car sharing providers. If they have electric vehicles, they must make sure that the vehicles are always fully recharged when they are rented out again. This is also a different topic. Now, what is this? So you have here many vehicles that have varying state of charge, have varying battery capacity, and certainly if you want to actually exploit the flexibility potential or get information about that, you need to know what the battery capacity of the vehicle is, what the current state of charge is. This is interesting that the car manufacturers are very reluctant in providing that information. They resisted for quite some time that this was included in the protocols, that they have to tell about the energy that is needed for recharging the car, because from that information, from successive recharging events, you could get information on how efficient the car actually uses the energy, and that is supposed to be a secret, and they don't want to tell too much about that. Meanwhile, this, as far as I know, has been agreed that they will actually provide that information. You have varying needs of the user in terms of range and departure time, and you have to exploit all that. So this is something which we do in these projects, and like within iTsource we did that, and that is more or less what I wanted to tell you about electric vehicles and charging protocols. So it's obvious that in order to be able to have a simple way of recharging our batteries at any place, we need standardization. We have to be able to actually do that in an interoperable way. We don't want to have different equipment for different charging stations at different countries. So we need standardized plugs. And then we also need something to be able to use alternating current and direct current charging. These are different plug standards. So there's a combined charging system having both plug standards in one plug. And so you can have flexible use of alternating current at, like that is slow charging. DC usually is fast charging. And the standardizations here, it says available by 2014. So for 2 years already now, we have these different protocols available. And so it is possible to recharge your vehicles. The problem actually is, if you look at all the charging stations that are out there, it is not the case that all of them talk 15.11.8. Quite a few just use a very simple charging method where it is not, where the provider of a charging station does not actually schedule the charging process. And so there is quite some potential still there to improve on the charging infrastructure. You could also use the electric vehicles for ancillary services, so for balancing energy, for voltage stabilization. You use the batteries in a reasonable way. You had a question? The communication. Oh, that is like the. That is, to some extent, it is CAN bus, yeah. But there's a specific communication between, like there's in the cable, there's a special line for sending signals, and so one of the pins in the plugs is that communication line. You could certainly also say, okay, why do I have to actually use such a signal line? I can also just use wireless communication or mobile communication. So it's not necessarily, so a CAN bus is not extended to the charging station. Yeah, inside the vehicle, you have CAN bus information or CAN bus communication. But between the vehicle and the charging station, it is the ISO 15118. It may be just using that signal, this signaling line, on which is integrated into the cable, or maybe it's just wireless communication. In particular, if you go to inductive charging, you have no physical connection anymore to the charging station. And then you need wireless communication in order to authenticate yourself and agree on the charging process. And inductive charging certainly is what we will see in the future, not in the near future, but in the like 10, 15 years, because then you don't need the cables. It's much more convenient. You just drive on such an area where you have inductive charging, and you don't have to manipulate any cables or any specific hardware. Okay. I emphasized several times that batteries of electric vehicles will provide significant load flexibility, which is an important requirement for the future energy system, so it's important to utilize that. We need adequate protocols. They are there. They are used internationally. Meanwhile, we can do load management with that at private charging spots. We can support local vehicle-to-grid applications. If you have a public charging station, so there are differences between private charging spots and semi-public or public charging spots. Semi-public means on a company's parking lot, in a parking garage, or on a hotel parking lot. There you have a provider for all the charging stations, and they might have special demand response applications. if you are at a public charging station, like if you are at the curbside and there you have a public charging station, then you usually cannot exploit any flexibility, because if you are parking your car at a public charging station, you want to have your vehicle recharged immediately. And so there you have different possibilities than at a private or a semi-public charging spot. Inductive charging will provide alternatives to cable-based charging, and that's all I wanted to tell you about electric vehicles. Now we have 15 minutes more time to tell you something about some kind of summary. Very brief summary of what we have seen in this course. We looked at a range of different topics. I told you initially something about why we actually need something in connection with information and communication technologies. What are the changes in the energy system that are inevitable in the foreseeable future, which need the development of intelligent information and communication technology. We looked at electric power distribution, at the standard way of doing that, and at things that are changing. So we looked at the problems that we actually get. The major problems that we will have were the fluctuations. You remember, this was important. Another important point was the uncertainty, and we had the decentralization. And that's the major challenge for the future systems, how we can design the electronic or the electric power distribution, or the how we can manage the power in the grid such that we have stability in spite of decentralized systems which are doing things in autonomous ways. We have to deal with uncertainty and with fluctuations, so these were the major problems. I showed you how we can actually address in a decentralized way the balancing power problem. We had the notion of device pool. That was essential topic, and we had the elite group. I showed you how that could be used to actually get some kind of cascaded response to changes in the power schedule. I showed you the smart home and energy management. I presented to you the organic smart home, this architecture for actually scheduling power inside a house, a building, or also in a larger environment. We looked at smart meter security. We looked at the protection profile and at security issues. I told you just today something about cryptography and secure protocols, about digital signatures. And then we briefly looked at battery charging. Didn't tell you too much about the current state of electric vehicles, but mainly about the problem of integrating the batteries into the energy system, or providing energy to the vehicles such that they can actually have mobility from that energy. So it is a range of, or has been a range of topics having to do with smart energy distribution, or you could say with energy informatics, and so I hope that that I managed to tell you so key statements. So energy distribution used to be a stable and fully understood part of power engineering. This used to be the case, and now we have these kinds of questions which we have to address, but which we do in our current research projects. So how to deal with volatile power generation, which is more or less uncontrollable. That's the shift from the paradigm that generation follows, or supply follows demand. It has to be reversed to supply follows, no, demand follows supply. The question was how to deal with decentralized power generation in the low voltage grid, because there we run into bottlenecks with the actual system there. How can we guarantee stability of energy supply, even under the scenario where we have fluctuation and uncertainty and decentralization? How can we actually discover load flexibility? I showed you these interfaces that we have, the menus for finding out the preferences of the user for using his appliances. We can transfer that to other scenarios in factories where engineers have to specify the flexibility that they can offer, and then they should be able to utilize that load flexibility. This is one of the most essential challenges that we have, to discover and utilize load flexibility in all kinds of scenarios, like not just in a house, in a building, but in factories, in production processes, in industrial processes. And we actually have large projects in the moment, so-called Copernicus projects, which are about to start sometime end of this year or beginning of next year. 4 very large projects which will run over a period of 10 years to actually find out more about sources for load flexibility, for stabilizing energy supply, designing new structures, new distribution grid structures to make sure that we get a stable system in the future. And if we have or detected flexibility, how can we make sure that this is actually offered? So why should a homeowner offer flexibility and shift the loads, like shift the washing or the times for his washing machine or dishwasher to different times? What are the incentives? Why should they do that? Just to help the system without having real individual benefit? So this is also an important problem, how we can manage that people actually offer that flexibility. And how can we guarantee security and privacy protection? We just talked about that. So these are the typical questions we are looking at, and I think it's a fascinating range of questions, of challenges, and it needs cooperation between different disciplines, between certainly power engineering, control engineering, and energy informatics. And I hope that you got interested in these topics, maybe also to learn more about that. There are other courses available on that, and so numerous opportunities for getting involved in research projects. We will start a few more projects in like this year and next year, so you can either get involved by writing your final thesis in this area, or work as a research assistant, or maybe, if you're really interested, get involved and write a dissertation project somewhere. Okay, so that's what I could do for you this term. Wish you good luck for your further studies, and I hope that you enjoyed this course. Okay, thank you. And as I said, we will meet again July 14 at 2 p.m. at the ESHL, the Energy Smart Home Lab. You can actually look up the location also on the web, but we will put information on the website of the course such that you find the location of that house. So we will visit the Energy Smart Home Lab and then go on to the House of Living Labs, and I can show you the research infrastructures there. You have a question? Ah, nice question. What kind of information would you like to get? It will be a written exam, although there are like 2 of you approached me that they leave early because they are from other countries, so they will get an oral exam. But since you are a sufficiently large number of people, you get a written exam, and I will certainly not tell you about which kind of questions I will have in that exam, but it will be on the topics that we just looked at. So here on the previous slide, I mentioned a few things. Topics like that could appear there definitely, and I could ask what the function of an elite group is. I could ask you what a digital signature is. I could ask you something about these protocols we just looked at. I could ask you about how we could actually schedule the times for appliances in a house, so what the optimization approach is for the organic smart home. We could talk about topics which I address, and it's quite a few topics. Yes, we have 2 old exams. I think they are available. Yes. Okay, so, but this is there are examples, but you cannot, I would never promise that the next exam or this exam will be exactly the same as the exams you have seen. It certainly will be different. Yeah, I can promise you that the exam will be different, but in the style of the questions, it will be similar. Yeah, and it will be an exam on either the 25th, 26th, or 27th of July, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday after the lectures end. Yeah. Pardon? The date of the exams, that's on the, you have to register for the exam, you know that. Yeah, you have to register by July 11. Yeah, you know that. I hope that you can register electronically, on the system. If that's not possible, you have to send a message to Andre Wiesner. And if you have done that, a few days after July 11th, the information is available on our website, on the website of the AIFB Institute. Yeah, there is the information available for you. Okay, more questions? That is not the case. I thank you for your attention, but we will meet again in the Energy Smart Home Lab. Okay, that's it for today.